Welcome, folks, to another Aliographic Creator Chat. Today, I'm joined by Mat Groom, who is a Sydney-based comic creator who has written for Marvel, DC, Boom Studios, and Image. And when he's not writing comics, he teaches storytelling classes up in Sydney. He's joining us today to chat about Inferno Girl Red, which came out in trade format earlier this year. And I think, as we're going to talk about later, we've got a second Inferno Girl Red coming soon. So, hi, Mat.
Hey there. Thanks so much for having me, James. I really appreciate the chance to chat.
Yeah, it's great. So to get started, as a national group across the land that we call Australia, Aliographic would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd specifically like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land where I'm speaking from, and the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, where Mat is joining us from, and to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and to extend that to all First Nations people across the land.
Absolutely.
So, to get the questions kicked off, how did you first get interested in comics, Mat?
I think I had a pretty traditional path, at least for people my age in that way, which is I sort of fell in love with superheroes first. I think particularly Batman in Batman the Animated Series on television. And I wanted to seek out more of that character. And I knew that comics was the way to do that. But if most people who were into comics and are sort of around my age will probably recognize the experience of being very excited to try comics, but then going to local news agents and realizing that unless you like really love the Phantom, your choices were pretty limited. So I had a bit of a hard time tracking down more stuff, but I ended up in my sort of very early teens heading to the next city over and tracking down a combination record and comic book store, and they had a huge collection of trades. And I picked myself up a Justice League trade by Grant Morrison and was thrown right in the deep end of trying to figure out, because it was like issue 35, I think, of JLA it was picking up. And there was characters that I had never seen before and most people would not be familiar with. But I deep end and fell in love even further. And from there, I fell in love with the medium and the art. And I think now it's so much about the joy of collaboration, because I've done a lot of, especially in a commercial sense, writing by myself. But I really like comics because it allows you to create with other people in a group that's small enough that you don't just feel like a cog in the machine, but big enough that you get to bounce our ideas around and have other people's work make you better. And yeah, I just want to share the joy of the comics for that reason, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Grant Morrison be an interesting one to kind of be thrown in with too, because he's got some very interesting concepts that he deals with. So
Oh man, like that Justice League, because I saw on the cover it's like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. It's like great, I know those guys. Like Zoriel, Big Barda, Plastic Man, the Flash, except it wasn't the Flash we know. He was from the 35th century or something. It was wild, but expanded by horizons, and that's always a good thing.
and and Big Barda's an amazing character. That's
Absolutely.
why isn't DC doing more with her? Um,
Agreed.
um, so we're a library group. How much have you had to do with libraries, both as a reader and as a creator of comics and other stories?
Again, I'm sure this is a not uncommon story for people like me, but I spent a lot of time in my school library in my teenage years and younger. I think coming from a background where we didn't have a lot of money, it was sort of like my best access to books and stories, but also I, being a sort of like socially awkward young lad, I was much more interested in just grabbing random books off the shelf about like Norse mythology rather than trying to figure out social interactions, I guess. And I think although I hopefully have progressed a little past that now. I still really value the haven that libraries are. And I think even now, because like I work entirely from home these days, but it really helps to change my space to get the creativity flowing. And one of my favorite things to do is go to the library. Um, in particular, the Newtown Community Library. It's very small, but it's just delightful in its vibe. And it's good to have reference material close to hand, but it's just like a nice environment, even just thematically, to be writing and telling stories. So um yeah, I feel like I have a very like soft spot in my heart for libraries, but I also really believe that if we're going to grow comics as a medium and teach people why I love it, or show people why like it should be loved as much as I do, libraries are a vital place to be starting that engagement. And if we aren't appreciating that connection point, then we're gonna only be hurting the industry. So I'm really passionate about making sure that what we have is shown to librarians. So I really appreciate things like this, so we can have that chance to spread. But it's also suited for libraries and is written with libraries and bookstores in mind.
So you do much like events and like with libraries, or is it more just this sort of thing, getting the message out through talking to groups like us and stuff?
I'm pretty new to it, to be honest. But yeah, I have actually. It's a very strange day for me actually, because talking to you today, this afternoon, and then at 11 p.m. tonight, I will be doing an interview with the American Librarian Association for their like teen conference for library reading, to sort of promote Inferno Girl Red there as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I'm like, yeah. It just feels right. They could have fell on the same day, but I'm also, yeah, I am still figuring out how to get more involved with libraries and make sure that connection is strong, which is why I really appreciate you guys and all that you do in helping to facilitate that.
Okay. So Inferno Girl Red is the comic that we're talking about today. Now on the Kickstarter campaign that you had for it, you describe it as combining superhero drama, teen angst, and tokusatsu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Action. Yeah. So to start with, do you want to explain for anyone listening who might not be familiar with the term what tokusatsu is?
Absolutely. So tokusatsu is a Japanese term that directly translated means like special effects, essentially. But it's also come to be the name of a genre of storytelling. And that genre of storytelling kind of has two halves to it. One is kind of monster focused. So that's where you get your Godzilla type stories. And then the other half of it is their version of superheroes. Which, and particularly in live action. So they have shows like Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, Ultraman. And there are some similarities with Western superheroes, but there's also a lot that's different. And I have sort of a personal connection to it because I grew up loving Power Rangers. Which I discovered later in life is actually an adaptation of a Japanese TV show.
Elements of the teen superhero drama and the teen angst that Western audiences will be familiar with, and combining that with that tokusatsu, striving for something better and challenging the status quo and all of that is kind of how you've combined all of that into that one story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. Then there is also some visual and aesthetic things that we draw on. My artist and co-creator partner, Erica De Urso, is a big fan of anime as well as tokusatsu. And that's just a lot of where her sort of visual influences are from. So a lot of that bleeds through. But we wanted to make sure that we were only taking like small parts of inspiration and not sort of like, copying things whole cloth, obviously, but also making sure that it wasn't a shallow reading of it. And I think that's why it was so important to me that we're trying to understand the construct of those stories and what they mean thematically and find ways to reflect that in our own way, so that it's sort of trying to use that to broaden Western superhero storytelling rather than just sort of like do a pastiche or anything like that, which wasn't in our interests.
Yeah. So, I guess then a big part of that is that the protagonist, Cassia Costa, she is challenging her status quo a lot as well. A lot of the story focuses on her balancing her natural pragmatism with belief in
Yeah.
something more in in the Inferno Girl Red uh, stuff. So, how did you find that balance between that superhero action and the introspection that this comic and the story that you were telling required?
Yeah, well, I think Inferno Girl Red kind of started with two different desires. Um, the first one, and I think it's a part of why I'm so passionate about this book connecting with library audiences, is that I was in a Facebook group, so it's a long time ago, of my local comic book store, and someone was saying that I think it was her niece had just seen a lot of Marvel films and was interested in getting into comics. Where would be a good place to start? And there were a lot of comics that were good for me when I was that age, but maybe didn't hold up as well, just in the sense that, for example, Ultimate Spider-Man is like a very good reinterpretation of Spider-Man as a teenager, but it's also over 2 decades old at this point, and it feels like it. It just doesn't feel like it reflects the modern teenage experience. And then there's really great comics that do, and I would put like Miss Marvel in that category. Like G. Willie Wilson's original run is fantastic, but in issue 1 you have tie-ins with the Inhumans, and then those the book gets renumbered, and it's very hard to figure out like what's the next book, where do I go next. So I was a little hesitant to recommend that for that reason as well, and I just felt like there needed to be something for teenagers that had everything that they could want, but was also incredibly welcoming and had the form of a novel. So it was a form that they could be familiar with from the start. So we really wanted to create that. And the other part of it was that we wanted to tell a teenage story that reckoned with the world as it is now. And I think that there's a very darkly interesting thing going on where we're putting so much of the world's problems and like generational trauma on the young people of today, and saying like all of these problems that we've caused, oh, you're going to fix them. We think you're great. Like you've got so much energy and passion. Go get them. Go fix the world, which I think is horribly unfair, and also a lot to put on people who are also trying to figure out who they are and becoming adults in the way that we all had to without all of that sort of extra baggage. So I wanted to try and create a story vehicle that allowed us to explore that. And kind of at the heart of the story is this idea that to overcome incredible odds when things aren't in your favor, you need to draw on this incredible well of belief. You need to have some form of faith. And that can be very transformative and powerful. But as we've also seen in the world today, that can also quickly lead to self-delusion and become very damaging in that way as well. So it's this bizarre, incredibly difficult tightrope to walk where you have to believe against all odds that you could make a difference, but you also have to exist in reality and not become untethered from the people around you and not become untethered from facts and the fact that sometimes things don't work out and life is hard. It's a book about how you reconcile all of that when it feels like there's darkness pressing in from all sides and there may not be a future at all. How do you be the best version of yourself with all of that going on?
It seems there's that identity thing in being the best version of yourself as well. But something else that I noticed about the book is so Inferno Girl Red has a secret identity, very common superhero trope, but it seems like practically every person she talks to is instantly, oh yes, you're Inferno Girl Red.
Yeah.
Was that an intentional thing of like, or is that So I don't know. I'm trying to ask it without spoilers for for people listening, but yeah,
Yeah, it's like I think part of the fun of trying to like reinvent superheroes, which is, it's a big claim, I suppose, but it's something that we're attempting to do, is taking all of those familiar building blocks and then subverting them and challenging those expectations. And I never want to do it from a place of like mean spirited. It's not like parody. We're definitely not out here trying to make fun of superheroes, because I genuinely love them and I believe in their potential. But I think you also have to acknowledge the building blocks that exist and redefine your relationship with them in some ways. And I think that within the realm of the book, Inferno Girl Red is a mantle. It's a legacy. There have been previous Inferno Girl Reds in the past, and the most recent Inferno Girl Red is someone who very much lived in that traditional superhero fashion, where she had a secret identity and she kept everybody else at arm's length to, protect them, and tried to operate alone, and found that exceptionally difficult. And Cassie is trying to blaze a new path and do things a little differently. So in that way, we're kind of there's a bit of meta commentary there, right? Where we're taking the old world of superheroes and making that into a person, and acknowledging the achievements of that, but also the limits of that, and sort of investigating if maybe there's a better path forward.
So yeah, it's so that's me right at the end of the book. So I'm trying to make sure as I'm phrasing stuff, not give spoilers and stuff. But yeah, like that was a really interesting scene, and that that this is how I've always done, but let's try something new.
Yeah,
kind of from someone who is. I got the distinct feeling is going to become very much a mentor character going forward.
absolutely.
That was a really interesting thing that you don't often see, especially just to form the relationship. A character who's taking on that mentor role, going, "Look, this worked for me, but let's try what seems to be working for you." Not, "Oh, do it, no, do it my way." Like that's what you usually get, and there's more of a process. So that was really refreshing to see that a young person just being told, "Oh yes, I'll listen to you," straight off the bat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's like, you never want to make it seem too easy, but I also think it's really important, as someone who is of an older generation now, to create characters who has that sort of relationship with young people, where like you're trying to guide them, but also you're recognizing that if you had everything figured out, we probably wouldn't be in this position in the first place. And you need to try and set aside your old traumas and recognize the mistakes that you make, and be open to trying things in different ways, because that's the only way that any of this is going to change.
Was that part of setting it like on living in dormitories and stuff on a campus of a college as well? Is that part of that, trying to get into that world of listening to the kids and everything, or young people, not kids, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons for that sort of setting. One of them absolutely is that, and also we wanted the nature of the school to be a little different. Part of it is just so it's exciting, right? Like we want it to be not just a regular high school that people experience day to day, but what might a high school, or it's sort of like almost like a bridge between high school and university, what might that feel like if it was handled a little bit better, if there was more room for creativity, and sort of like mental health and emotional development was a little more tangible in the subject matter. And we wanted to feel like a place where people can sort of become the best version of themselves. And then there's also just like logistical storytelling reasons why it's good to have everybody sort of crammed into one location. It is a bit of a pressure cooker. And I think that's where I think there's like boarding school fiction really works, because it takes the teenage world and all of the drama that comes with that, and then it just sort of like squishes it into one spot, and you're not allowed to leave. Like you have to stay in the pressure cooker for months and months and months, and that's going to get the most sort of explosive, dramatic results. So there's a bit of that, both in sort of the campus, and then I think we talk about this. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. When shortly after Cassio arrives at this new city, it's ripped out of our dimension and sort of cast into darkness, and it has a thin protective bubble for the moment, but darkness and evil is pressing in from all sides and there's no escape. So that's a sort of like the next level of the pressure cooker, where there's nowhere to go. You have to deal with the darkness that's like right outside.
Yeah. So that's probably a really good segue into the world that this is set in is part of something called the Massiveverse. So do you want to tell us a bit about the Massiveverse and how it all works?
Yeah. So when I was in the earliest stages of developing Inferno Girl Red, some of my friends and colleagues in the industry were also developing their own books with the hope of getting them published to Image Comics. There was Kyle Higgins and Marcelo Costa, who were creating Radiant Black, Ryan Parrott and Abel on Rogue Sun, Melissa Flores on The Dead Lucky. And we wanted, it sort of, because like we're friends and we chat with each other, we were looking at what we were all working on, and we saw some connective threads in terms of like our own passions and what we believe the book should be and how we want to sort of push the genre. But they're also extremely different, and we feel like they carved out different spaces. And we had the thought that we could link these and have them share kind of a narrative universe, and take the idea of that that's been so popularized by Marvel, but explore what that could be if it was done with creators who own the characters and the stories and have no editorial mandates. There's no corporations telling us what to do. We make all of our own decisions. So what that meant practically is that once every year or so, we do these crossovers called Supermassive, where characters from the books will interact, and there'll be like a sort of like big one-shot exciting event that will be informed by where the characters are at in that moment, and sort of give you a bit more insight into those characters, and then just the fun of seeing them all connect, and then they'll sort of go their separate ways again. But we wanted to do that, but also very vitally make sure that they were never ever required reading, so that if you just wanted to read Inferno Girl Red, you read book 1, you read book 2, you read book 3, hopefully, and so on and so forth. Same with Radiant Black, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. And you'll never be reading those and feel like you're missing something, or you have to go and read something else. You won't notice any difference, essentially. And for us, that was kind of the best of both worlds. We could celebrate the fact that these characters can connect in certain instances and get some joy out of that, and help sort of like cross-pollinate. And like, if you're a fan of Inferno Girl Red, you read a Supermassive, you might see another character you love and be like, oh, they seem really interesting, I want to chase that down. But never, ever compromising the stories that we're telling individually. And it has a few other added benefits as well, because it in some ways there's like a collective bargaining element to it. For example, we are going to soon be launching a card game based on the Massiveverse. That's a sort of like competitive card battler, but everything's all in one box, and it'll have Inferno Girl Red and the Griffin from our book, but also characters from all of the other books as playable decks. And that's something that we would never be able to get off the ground, at least right now, just for Inferno Girl Red, and ditto for the others. But in coming together, we can do stuff like that allows for that sort of exciting crossover. So yeah, it's sort of like us trying to reinvent the superhero shared universe in a way that's hopefully all of the upside and none of the downside. And I'm very happy with how it's come out so far. I feel like we've stuck to our guns of being really additive, but making sure that we're never creating any problems for libraries trying to put stuff on shelves, for example.
Yes, that can be a big thing when you've got 17 different Thor ones coming out and trying to work out exactly which one to do. And some of them you need to have read this version of the Avengers, and so it can
Exactly.
So it's very much appreciate that you're making it as simple for us as possible. That's great.
That's the goal.
So and the supermassive, they're trade paperbacks and or not.
So not at the moment. They have been like they're sort of like I think about 50-page one-shots that we've been releasing in comic stores. Our hope is that we'll do enough of them that we can then collect them into trade paperbacks that will be available in libraries and bookstores. We haven't got enough of them to do that just yet. But even then, that'll be like, there'll be one volume that will be able to sit alongside the other books if bookstores and libraries want that. But they won't be so related to the stories that they need to go anywhere in particular or that you need to get it for the others. It'll just be a nice little optional side thing.
Yeah. And the purpose is that, as well as you don't need that to follow Inferno Girl Red or Radiant Black or any of those, you don't need to follow any of those to appreciate Supermassive either, or is that kind of works?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we wanted to make those stories kind of almost like it's like a sampler, right? Like a way to introduce all of those characters and see who you might like, so you can branch out to those books if you want to. And part of that meant making sure that everyone gets something of an introduction, so you have an understanding, or at least enough to sort of like enjoy the story of who these people are, how they interrelate, what their sort of individual worlds are like before we get into the meat of the Supermassive story.
Oh, well, when, I'm saying when, not if, you do get enough to get the trade paperback, we'll definitely have to get all of the creators of the different ones that are combined into Supermassive in for one of these chats. That'd be, get you all talking with us together. That'd be great.
Absolutely. We'll test the limits of Zoom, see how much it can handle.
Yeah. So, but back to Inferno Girl Red. Now, you created the series with Erica D'Urso. How did her art influence the story, and vice versa? How has writing this story influenced the art that she's been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I love working with Erica so much. It was a really long journey actually to find the right artist for this project, or the right co-creator for this project. I actually started working on Inferno Girl Red about the same time as Kyle was saying on Radiant Black, but there was a years difference in release just because I couldn't find the right person. I knew that I wanted a female, or at least a non-male artist and co-creator on the book, because I knew that just me trying to tell a teenage girl's story wasn't going to feel particularly authentic, and it needed that extra perspective. And when I finally found Erica, I was so excited because she has this balance of incredibly electric kinetic action. Like the action stuff feels larger than life, but the emotion is so raw and human. And when a character's heart breaks, your heart breaks. And I knew we needed both of those things. And when I was sort of pitching the book to Erica, I could just see the way her eyes lighting up that she got it, and she was really excited about it. And we developed this process where I would talk to her about the themes and the ideas, and then she would sketch out whether it's locations or characters, or even just sort of vibes of scenes. And that would make me realize actually what I wanted to do more. And I would go back and sort of revise my plans. And we do that bounce back and forth as we go through production. So I'll write a loose outline, she'll read that, she'll give me some feedback and do some early sketches and things like that. We'll bounce back and forth on the sketches. Then I'll write a script, and then she'll do the art. And then I'll often go back and rewrite the script to match the art better, because I've given, well, not given, we're co-creators, but we share creative control. And in the script, I'll suggest ways that she might frame things, but then she knows she has the creative control to completely reframe that and come at the idea from a different perspective. So I might suggest a 5-panel page that's very tight with quick beats, and she might go, actually, this needs just one big splash moment. I'm just going to handle it like this. So I'll then sort of just rewrite my script to make sure that I'm taking advantage of that. And I really value that process, because I think that's why the world feels so realized, is because it's not one person and their ideas. It's that idea that's evolving constantly by bouncing back between us. And even like Monty, our colorist in the book, it has so much of a role in the identity of the book because of how he uses light and shadow and certain choices of like reversing colors in moments of intense, like the peaks of action, influences out how I write the pacing of action scenes. I know that I want to hit that, like you build tension, and there's like inflection point, and I just know that Eagle's gonna really hit that moment. But yeah, I love this stuff. That's my favorite part about making comics, is having other people make you better and seeing what you make all together. And yeah, like all of the sort of it's funny, Erica denies that she has a good fashion sense, but all of the characters in the book, I'm just like, oh, they're so cool. How are they so they're all so cool and in different ways, you know? And Apex City is such a cool place, and it's all cool in a way that I'm just not. Like I could never I feel like I bring stuff to the book, but I'm not cool in that way. And with a book like this, you want it to be cool. And Erica's so vital to that.
Yeah, I noticed that all the back matter that was included in the version that I've got. I'm not sure that's in the trade paperback. I think that's just in the Kickstarter.
In the Kickstarter
Believe.
hardcover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but all of that back matter, including like the design of the university and the all of that, really gave that sense of all of these different elements coming in between all the people involved, which was it was so great to get to see that bit of the process too. Yeah. Um. So it's very like the collaboration, very obviously very communicative and building and everything. Did it ever become? Did you ever butt heads about? No, actually, I think this needs to be this way, and Eric is going, no, I think it'll work better this way, and if so, like, how did you deal with that? That's yeah.
I'm not sure that there was ever any point where there's like real contention. Um, yeah, I think if anything, there was just like processes of refinement, um, especially with like the character design stuff. Some characters came fully formed like immediately, whereas the superhero costume for Inferno Girl Red took a lot of refinement and back and forth. And I don't think it was ever that Erica was like, this is the right thing. And I was like, no, it isn't. I think it was more that Erica was trying a bunch of stuff and we both knew it wasn't quite there, but we also didn't know how to get it there because we were really trying to be like, what is a superhero, but like 10 years from the future, like, and not in the future in sort of our world, but like, how will the medium have progressed in 10 years' time? And can we try to like leap ahead and get there? And it was just like so much back and forth and tweaking different things. And
Yeah,
and so,
like one of the things that stood out to me was the a lot of the stuff that you were again showing in the back matter were designs that didn't have the whole face covered, and then that
yes,
moment that Eric has written in that as soon as Ego was on board, she was like, "Oh yes, I can cover the whole face because I'm no longer scared about being able to show all the emotion because I know that Ego's coloring will be able to do that."
absolutely. Like that was a huge moment. And I think like I had a feeling early on that we did want to do that full face cover. And I think that was a moment of trust between her and Igor. And I think that's something that just comes through the creative process. And I certainly have that as well. I used to script very tightly, whereas now I know what moments it would be helpful to Erica for me to be very precise, and what moments where it would serve everybody better if I just sort of say, like, here's kind of the vibe we're going for, show me what you got. And she could just cut loose and find her own interpretation of that. And that's the trusting relationship that builds up when everyone has the same goal, and knows each other well enough to know when you can sort of like throw them the ball and just like let them run. And it's an incredible feeling.
And you're based in Australia. Erica's
Hmm.
over in Italy, and
That's right.
Igor's over in Italy as well. Oh,
Yep.
Igor, sorry. And your letterer, Becca
Yep.
Carey, is in the US. And Kyle Higgins, who we've spoken about as the creator of Radiant Black, but is also the editor on Inferno Girl Red, is also in the US. So this is a very global team. How does that collaboration process work across 3 countries and that are in 3 time zones that are about as
Different
different
as
as
they
they
could
can
be.
be?
Yep. Becca was in Ireland for quite a while as well. So yeah, it's with great difficulty, I think would be the answer to that question. Lots of emails. I think that I have become unfortunately attuned to different time zones because so much of what I do is working with people in the US and often in Europe. So I like doing just this interview with you on a nice afternoon is lovely because it's often like get up at 2 a.m. because you need to do a podcast in America. So I've just sort of like taken on board the fact that I need to be super flexible with my schedule. And they are a little bit as well. And we use those opportunities to chat, in person over Zoom because I feel like that's a really necessary and efficient way of doing it. But there's also just a lot of emails. We try to be very diligent about keeping records and having the lines of communication be clear and a very well managed Dropbox and all of that sort of thing to manage it. But there's just a lot of flexibility required. I think there are some downsides to trying to do comics in Australia, and that is definitely one of them for sure. But a manageable one.
Well, hopefully, as the Australian comics industry grows, it'll become less of a thing.
He's hoping.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. So, uh, before we move on to other stuff, I want to keep talking about the art a bit because going back to Cassia, one of the things that I found particularly interesting was that she has vitiligo, which is a condition where pigment either doesn't develop or disappears from your skin in certain areas. And she's got this on her face and her hands. And the reason I found this so interesting is, well, for starters, you don't see many protagonists with vitiligo, but also at no point in the comic is it commented on in any way. It's just it just a part of who she is, and no one bats an eyelid. Was that acceptance and inclusivity planned, or did it develop organically as the story developed?
Yeah, it actually wasn't planned at all, at least on my part. It's interesting. I was talking about the process of designing superhero costume for Inferno Girl Red, how iterative that was. Kind of the opposite with Cassia, where I told Erica who Cassia was as a person, like the challenges that she goes through and sort of her personality and where she's coming from emotionally. I didn't give any sort of direction on sort of aesthetics. And Erica came up with 3 different concepts for the character. And one of them was exactly how Cassia is in the book now. And as soon as I saw that version, it was like Cassia had already existed and Erica was just drawing that character. It felt so fully formed, it just felt right. It was like somewhere out there in the sort of like the ether that was always going to be Cassia, and then here she is. And that, when I said that to Erica, I was like, oh, definitely that one. Erica said, like, oh, thank God. Like, I that was the one. I didn't want to just send you one. I wanted to give you options, but that's who I wanted Cassia to be. And that initial sketch had vitiligo, and it's, I think, something that informed or was informed by our discussions in the sense of, I think it's another small reason why Cassie is perhaps a little bit more reserved, and she feels like she definitely doesn't take anything for granted, and perhaps has a small element of cynicism in her in regards to how life has treated her and how life can sometimes go. And I think that's something that I sort of brought into the character as I was thinking about her, but I also never wanted to make it, I guess, as you said, like a big scene where she says like, and also this happened to me, because that just never struck me as how Cassia would verbalize that. It's not something that's the most pressing thing for her, but it is a small thing that informs her experience. In the same way that like I knew that I didn't want this character to be a man, because I felt like this sort of like underdog story, it, you know, having that be a white man felt inauthentic. And I think this is just another small layer of that specificity that informs life experience and informs that perspective that Cassia has, both a good and ill, and sort of challenges her in her sort of like journey of growth. And it's just like, I think another like a little artifact of how beneficial that creative process and in collaboration is, because it's so perfect and it feels right, and it helps us bring us to like a small element of representation that you don't see very often. But I wouldn't have, if it was up to me, I would not have come up with that myself. And it only exists because of what Erica brought to the project.
That's that's amazing. And vitiligo, is it? Is it the curse of reading? I've never actually heard the word pronounced. So
I'm exactly the same way. I've read a lot about it recently, and I have not spoken about it. So definitely don't take me as gospel.
Yeah. Well, my both of our apologies then to anyone listening who, if we've got the pronunciation of that wrong.
Absolutely.
So, now the book was Kickstarted.
Yes.
And very successful. Kickstarter. It more than doubled the 42,000 that you're asking for. It was over 100, I think, in the end, which is very like that's really impressive. What was the thinking behind kickstarting it, rather than going down one of the more traditional publishing routes that people, that you hear about people taking?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, it came back to the library and bookstores thing and format. We wanted to do a novel, and if you're writing single issues of comic books, and I think if you're doing it right, at least you're writing it in 20-page chunks, where each of those 20 pages has a story in of itself that eventually builds to something bigger that you collected a trade. But you have to write to these intense peaks and valleys that gets you to a cliffhanger every 20 pages, so that people who are buying that format have something that is a whole unit of storytelling that is satisfying. But as much as I love writing for that format and love comics that are like that, we wanted to do something that was a little bit different and felt in structure more like a novel, so that was more accessible. So if you've only read YA prose novels and you want to dabble, you could read this and it would feel familiar enough in its structure that you are sort of like swept up into it. And it also allows us to have more time with the characters and take those bigger moments and have long conversation scenes, or even at the climax of the book, an action scene that is like almost 18 pages long, which in single issues of comics would be basically the whole issue. So you probably couldn't do that. But it's very, very hard to get a comic made that way, because getting funding in advances is very difficult when you can't say, well, every 20 pages we'll send it out and people pay for it and get some money back. So there was no way of us funding the book. And by that, I really just mean mostly paying for Erica and Igor to live for the almost a year that they spend working on the book, while making it in that format, while also keeping creative control of the book. There were avenues we could have gone down where we sold the rights, and in return, we got funding that would have allowed us to produce the book, but that would have handed creative control over to other people. And we were really passionate about doing it ourselves and making all the calls ourselves, because in a lot of ways we wanted to do something that felt a little bit more progressive and challenged the ideas of traditional superhero comics. And I think it would have broken our hearts a little bit if we got a long way down this path and someone reined us back in and said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Which meant that really the only path open to us to pay for the creation of the book was Kickstarter. So we made the pitch to the world, not knowing how it would go and being almost entirely unknown creators. And the response was incredible, and incredibly validating. And seeing the excitement that people had and doing fan art like 2 days after the Kickstarter launched for this character that didn't exist at that point was very moving. And I'm always incredibly appreciative and grateful that people were excited enough to sort of invest in our world and give us a try.
And so obviously the investment of the people was great. What were some of the other good and some not so good aspects of the Kickstarter approach?
There's a lot of pressure, right? Like people pay you a lot of money up front, and then you have to deliver, and you have to do that when the thing isn't real yet. And we learned firsthand how difficult that could be when Erica injured herself while drawing and couldn't draw for months. It got so bad where she was hospitalized for a bit and couldn't pick up a fork to feed herself. Her arm was so busted. And it's very difficult to tell people, like, the book's going to be late. You're going to have to wait. There's nothing we could do. If we push Erica now, we may make it permanent. She might not ever be able to draw again, and that's her livelihood ended forever. And that was really stressful for me. But I learned that if you're just honest and transparent with people and you explain to them the situation and let them in, that for the most part, they will be incredibly understanding and supportive. What we heard so consistently was, we understand, make sure Erica's okay. We're very excited for the book, but that's not important. More important than someone's health. The book will be done when it's done. So that was great. And then there was also, like, because of those delays, the shipping environment in the world changed, especially in the middle of the pandemic. We had to switch printers, and then to find a way to get it to people without waiting like literally 6 months just to have the book shipped, we had to take a much more expensive option, which cost us a lot more money. And in that time, currency conversion rates changed dramatically. So I was getting US dollars in Kickstarter sent to me in Australian dollars here, which I then had to convert back to the US dollars and then to euros to pay Erica and Igor. And as the currency rates fluctuated, that really turned not in our favor. There was just it's a lot. It's messy. It's very much like running a small business. Anyone in that position will know it's just hard, and you're going to be stressed out a lot of the time. But again, it was all made worth it by how supportive and excited people were. And there's something really beautiful about being able to share the book as it's in process, showing people little glimpses of, like, hey, guess what Erica drew today? Check this out. And it's not colored yet. It's not lettered yet. Like, trust us, it's going to get better, but look at this. And people being excited to feel like they're a part of it. And they are absolutely a part of it because they are the ones who made sure it was able to happen. So yeah, it was lovely and scary, I guess.
Yeah. And not just the book itself. I can't help but notice on the shelf behind you one of the stretch goals. What was the thinking behind the replica Inferno Girl Red helmet that you had as one of the stretch goals on the campaign?
Well, because of my affinity for Power Rangers, I happen to know some people who make replica helmets, Power Ranger helmets for fans. And one guy in particular who does just incredible work. And I knew that having him do an Inferno Girl Red replica helmet would be incredible. And this would be a way to do that if people were interested. But it was also like, is anyone going to want this? Like, again, this was a character that did not exist really at the point where the Kickstarter was launched. And we're asking people to not only be excited enough to buy our book, but also for some people, be excited enough to spend like $800 on a replica helmet for a character whose story they'd never read. So I was very like, I don't think this is going to happen, but look, we could offer it and see how it goes. And yeah, I think we sold out of almost all of our allotment of them. And I still get messages from people like, hey, you're going to do that again? I really want one of those. So yeah, it's so cool. And it's like lovely to have such a tangible representation of this thing that we created so close to hand. Yeah, it's really nice.
So, and you planning on something similar for the upcoming Kickstarter?
We're not going to do helmets for this Kickstarter just because I'm so glad we did it and the quality was incredible, but the cost more of shipping and insurance of the shipping than anything proved to be prohibitive. There's a lot of learnings of the first Kickstarter where, we learned what was actually feasible or not. And one of the things we realized was that's probably not the best form to sell something like that. So instead, we're focused on things that are a little bit more manageable, like the outprints that we do. And that's one of my favorite parts of doing the Kickstarter is reaching out to a bunch of different artists who work I love and asking them to interpret our world with their sort of own like flair and vision. So there'll definitely be some of that in the Kickstarter this time as well.
That's great. So we've mentioned a few times, but do you want to tell us a bit about this Kickstarter and what's next for Inferno Girl Red more generally?
Absolutely. So yeah, we're at time of recording, not too far away from the launch of the Inferno Girl Red Book 2 Kickstarter. But if you, as is quite likely, you've never read any Inferno Girl Red before, we'll also be including Inferno Girl Red Book 1 hardcovers and digital copies. So you could join us on the ground floor. You don't need to have experienced anything. You can jump in now. We have a pre-launch page up now. And if you search Inferno Girl Red Book 2 on Kickstarter, that'll come up. Also, I think infernogirlred.com is redirecting there right now. So it's an easy way to find it. And yeah, I really encourage you to check it out if you're interested, because through this avenue, we do oversized hardcovers of the books, which are not really available anywhere else. They have exclusive covers, they have some back matter that you won't find anywhere else, and also exclusive prints and things like that. So lots of cool extras, and probably like the nicest format of the book as well. So, and it's also just like, again, it's fun to be part of the process, especially as we're moving into the future and creating the next stage of Cassia's story, and expanding on the ideas of the first one. So yeah, encourage everyone to check that out if you're interested.
Yeah, so the hardcover Kickstarter edition of book 2 will be through that, but you can also, if you missed it in round 1, you can also get that Kickstarter exclusive of book 1 through this second campaign as well. Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
Cool. So, and what's next for you? So obviously, Inferno Girl Red has been a big part of your work for quite a while, and
yeah.
I assume will continue to be so, and hope it will.
Hopefully.
But yeah. So, but what else are you doing? Where else can people see your work? All of this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So a bunch of stuff that I can't talk about right now, but is very exciting. I'm actually doing or helping out on another Kickstarter. A friend of mine, Kelly McMahon, who's an Australian now living in LA, is a graphic artist, and she has been designing decks of playing cards that are just absolutely gorgeous. And her latest one is sort of 1920s noir themed. And I worked with her to write a murder mystery that you can play using like a little detective's journal, and also the playing cards themselves and all the character art on those to sort of uncover the mystery. That's called Bad Blood. And I think that has a pre-launch page up now as well. So if you search Bad Blood on Kickstarter, you'll likely find that. I'm doing a few short stories. I've got a Power Rangers short story coming up in the 30th anniversary annual coming from Boom at the end of August, and some short stories from major publishers that I can't quite talk about just yet. But my passion will always be creator and comics, where we get to do our own thing. And Inferno Girl Red is one of those, and there will be something else of that vein coming from Image next year as well, which is really exciting.
mysterious, and yeah, keep watching this space.
That's it. I'm sure
Um,
like anyone in publishing can
oh yeah, it's
knows what it feels like. You got all this stuff going on, you can not talk
not
about
talk
it.
about it. Yeah,
And
yeah. No,
yeah,
I completely understand.
yeah,
But no, it's good. It heightens the mystery. Like what's coming, what's going. So,
absolutely.
um, so one of the things we always ask the people who come on these creator chats is, what are 3 comics or graphic novels that you've enjoyed recently, and that you would encourage others to check out?
Good question. I mean, I think maybe this is more like, for writing purposes, but I did go back to read all of Ultimate Spider-Man before working on Inferno Girl Red, just I find it such a inspiring touchstone, and there's just so much of it. I mean, I've got it back there-ish, like over 100 issues in hardcover that you could just sort of tear through, which is absolutely amazing. I will always love Day Tripper, um, which I think that was Vertigo. Um,
It was
and I forgot the artist.
Gabriel Barr or
Yes,
Fabian
yes,
Moon?
both of them. I
Yes, yes.
believe they were together on it. It's just such a beautiful, poignant story of what a life is and what a life means, examined through like how you recontextualize that through death. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And last one, I would say, and it's only just starting to come out now in single issues, so the trade will be a little while, but there is an Image series called Deep Cuts that my editor Kyle Higgins and a friend and jazz musician professor of his, Joe Clark, have been working on, and it is a story of jazz through the decades, and it moves sort of decade through decade following different characters. And they're all sort of like oversized chapters, and the art is absolutely gorgeous, and it's such a like moving and artful examination of like what music means to different communities and how it evolves over time. So definitely keep Deep Cuts on your radar. I think it's just it's real art, and it's very moving.
That's great. So yeah, I haven't read Deep Cuts yet, but it was one that I was looking at. But yeah, I always love it when it's stuff that that I'm already across, that people are saying, that people in the chats are like, oh yes, this is a good one to read. So for a long time, Day Tripper was my go-to response whenever anyone said, oh, comics are just for kids. I'm like, look at Day Tripper, seriously.
Absolutely. It's so easy to hand to people and be like, this is amazing. You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
And like for everyone can enjoy Day Tripper, I think.
Yeah. So that's we're coming up on the amount of time you've so kindly agreed to chat to us and everything. So before we head off, what's the best way for people to keep updated on your projects?
Yeah, probably I'm gonna call it Twitter. I'm gonna call it X. On Twitter, I'm at Matthew Groom. That's Matthew with one T or one word, MATHEWGROOM. I also have a website, which is matgroom.com. Again, Matt with one T. And yeah, that's probably the best ways to follow where I'm at. I'll always blast out what I'm doing from those venues. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And for
Thank you
those
for
of
having
you,
me.
yep, and for those of you listening in, you can keep in touch with Alia Graphic through our socials. We're on Facebook and Twitter, X, whatever Musk is doing with it, and we also have a website that is currently aliagraphic.blogspot.com, but keep an eye on that space, because we may be moving to one more in the alia.org.au wagon house and everything. So keep an eye on that space. So few changes, but if you follow the ones that we currently have, we'll definitely be letting you know where to move to if we do move anything. So thank you for joining us, Matt, and yeah.
Thank you again. It was a delight. Really appreciate it.